So, welcome to the channel. Welcome to Bunk Hits. This is the place for underground music. If you make music, please send us some of what you make. We are accepting submissions right now. There's links in the description. Please get involved with the community, and you will find some other artists to collaborate with and listeners to hear your stuff. So today we're going to talk about a essay in this book, The Psychic Soviet, written by Ian Svenonius. He's like a kind of punk, post-punk, maybe situationist, maybe sleaze rock, crime wave, crime rock, whatever you want to call it, artist. And he writes some political critique, cultural critique in a collection of essays here called The Psychic Soviet. He's got one called Beatles versus Stones. That's a classic thing. So if you're interested in this type of stuff, please click like, click subscribe, follow the channel, and stay tuned in. So yeah, Beatles versus Stones, and it's an examination of the schism, and it kind of deals with the Sino-Soviet split. What? Let's get into that. So it starts with Sympathy for the Devil. Everyone knows the 1968 Rolling Stones goofball epic Sympathy for the Devil. Composed in front of Jean-Luc Godard's cameras for the film 1+1, the song betrays the voodoo inculcation of their friend Dr. John, whose Gree album had become an underground hit that year. That's like a Louisiana guy. If you're unfamiliar with Dr. John and you like the Rolling Stones, check that out. You'll kind of see what Rolling Stones were kind of stealing. The Stones had liberally cribbed from the swampy black magic sound of that record, like I just said, particularly on their song Gimme Shelter. Indeed, it seems that only by borrowing Dr. John's identity could the Stones break from slavishly aping the Beatles' innovations. Ooh, diss. You're stealing from one guy or you're stealing from the other guy. So let's see. Initially, the song seemed an unlikely choice for Godard, with its themes of Satan through history wreaking havoc on the status quo. The lyrics actually seem to propose that the person responsible for murdering the Kennedys, Jesus Christ, and Tsar Nicholas were, in fact, one and the same. The song's singer, who is apparently the devil. And that is kind of what it sounds like if you just listen to the lyrics of the song kind of on their face. Godard had already engaged in an impressive flurry of filmmaking that year, having just made La Chinoise, I can't pronounce these, and Weekend, sorry, I can't pronounce French. His films had become more polemic, more didactic, and less beholden to narrative. He'd cast his lot in unequivocally with the revolutionary movements happening across the globe in Vietnam, Cuba, and Paris. So, yeah, one of his movies, La Chinoise, I think that's probably French for the Chinese, sympathetically follows a Maoist cell of Parisian youths as they commit murder in the name of class war. Wow. What a film to be made in the 60s. Weekend had a bourgeois woman joining a band of hippie cannibal gorillas in the forest to eat her husband. It's very feminist. And then another one, La Gaille Savior, posits a boy and girl making film from a new paradigm. Okay. So the film 1+1 has 3 distinct episodes. The centerpiece being a cinema verite exposition of the Rolling Stones in the studio, trying out endless musical approaches for their new song, Sympathy for the Devil. All manner of instruments are auditioned. The one constant is Mick Jagger's vocal, which never mutates at all. What would Godard's intent be to painstakingly document this bit of rock and roll fluff? The lyrics actually equate, and this is true if you listen to the lyrics of this song, Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones. The lyrics actually equate the killing of the Tsar and the Nazi conquest of Europe as the same man's handiwork, meaning in short that Bolshevism equals Nazism, which, come on, they were fighting each other. The song also seems to suggest that JFK, the man responsible for the American invasions of Vietnam and Cuba, is akin to Christ, the song's narrator's other victim. As this seems profoundly inconsistent with Godard's Maoist viewpoint that he portrayed in his other films, A re-examination of the song's content is in order, and this is where he gets into it. While Goddard worked in the mostly academic world of film theory and art concerns, the Stones were employed by American pop radio. Though English by birth, the rock and roll band lived and died at the whim of the American market, which was influenced enormously by disc jockeys and commercial television. As in any hegemony, the artist who chooses to say something that is unpopular or verboten risks dismissal. Under Stalin, it was the archipelago. Under capitalism, neglect, and thus artistic death. You know, if you're saying something that the establishment doesn't like, maybe you're not getting all the gigs anymore at the highest level. So they ignore you, and then you're just artistically irrelevant. In a pop art form, insignificance surpasses death in horror, as the neglected worker actually labors for his competitors, producing ideas and songs to be resold by those who have access to radio and promotion. Sympathy for the Devil's chorus and theme, for example, had been lifted directly from the Satan song Makin' Deals, an obscure LA garage tune no one ever heard. Wow, that's cool. I didn't know there was a band called the Satans. Because of the nature of this highly ideological and money-driven medium through which the Rolling Stones lived and expressed themselves, ideas and ideals had to be shrouded and concealed, as has so often been the case throughout art's history. I mean, think about homosexual authors having to hide their true intentions of their stories in metaphor and subtle cues. Sympathy for the Devil never actually announces that it is sung by the devil. It merely asks the listener, "Can you guess my name?" After the singer regales us with stories of his various exploits. The title of the song could be interpreted quite literally, that the song's singer is sympathetic to the archetype devil, or Lucifer, the perennial outsider, who's cast from heaven, society, by God, the power structure, for outside views. Read this way, the acts of the song's protagonist are, though widely considered antisocial, actually positive. I was round when Jesus Christ had his moment of doubt and pain. This alludes to Christ's momentary reflection on his earthly insignificance, a brief return to the sanity which preceded his Son of God megalomania. Make damn sure that Pilate washed his hands and sealed his fate. Without Christ's supposed crucifixion, there would have been no martyrdom and no burgeoning Christian movement to eventually unify Europe after spurging the disintegration of the Roman Empire. The Jewish people couldn't do it as they weren't an evangelical sect, and Zoroastrianism was too hard to pronounce. Stuck around St. Petersburg when I saw it was time for a change, killed the Tsar and his ministers, Anastasia screamed in vain. So, this lyric discusses the Bolshevik termination of the Romanov bloodline and their subsequent changing of that city's name. These were positive developments for Russia, despite Disney's revisionist claims otherwise. I rode a tank, held a general's rank, when the blitzkrieg raged and the bodies stank. This never says what side the general in question fought for, merely that he rode in a tank while the Nazis conducted genocide. The body stank reference leads us to Russia, where Nazi cruelty was at its worst, so the general is probably a Russian tank commander who defeated Germans in Stalingrad and Kursk, turning the tide of the Second World War. I shouted out who killed the Kennedys when after all it was you and me. During VH1's roundup of 100 greatest pop songs, Charlie Watts comments on this song saying simply, controversial lyrics. This is what he was referring to. The Rolling Stones are supporting the unpopular lone gunman theory here, saying that Oswald was not a stooge but an actual socialist with a rifle who killed the president as an act of conscience. JFK was, after all, a dangerous idiot who nearly blew up the world. And you and me lyric The You and Me lyric is Mick and Oswald singing directly to poor CIA mind control victim Sirhan Sirhan and all the various federal agencies who helped murder RFK. Yeah, like it's not like just anyone listening in the audience. I know, right? Yeah, and Ian Svenonius really knew what he was doing with this. Like, it fits in the pocket, like it's the breast pocket thing. You can carry it around with you. Just like, yeah. No, I know, it's pretty good. I shouted out Who Killed the Kennedys when after all it was You and Me. That's Mick as Oswald singing to Sirhan Sirhan and all of the federal agencies who helped murder RFK. So as the song progresses, we now see that its protagonist is not the devil, but the Marxist idea of dialecticism through history. The inevitable changes which lead us from exploitation, first by kings under feudalism, then by the bourgeoisie under capitalism, to a socialist government and communist society, a process called historical materialism. We see why Jean-Luc Godard employs the Stones, despite their seeming incongruence with his trajectory at the time. This is the reason for this particular song being played over and over in the film, with the lyric as the only constant. Sympathy for the Devil was released on the LP Beggar's Banquet. The record cover featured a filthy toilet, bedecked with graffiti. Released in the wake of Sgt. Pepper's, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, in the same year as Tommy, the album was expected to have a cohesive presentation and not just be a collection of songs. It had to be like a rock opera or something. The Rolling Stones were nothing if not conscious of fashion and the market. The theme or concept they chose for Banquet is unmistakably Marxist. From the LP title to the songs Salt of the Earth, Factory Girl, Street Fighting Man. In the graffiti on the cover are written the word Bob Dylan's Dreams, with an arrow going to the flusher. This is a pointed dismissal of Dylan's then recent politics are a drag stance. If Dylan's dream was a mere hedonist escapism, the Stones considered it sewage. As the song closes, Mick cries out again and again, "Can you guess my name?" He seems to beg us stridently at first, then desperately, finally incoherently, and no wonder no one ever guessed his name. It wasn't the devil. It was historical materialism. So that's the little bit on the Stones. This next part is the Beatles bit. The Beatles' White Album had caused such speculation on the part of hippie Nazis like Manson, who felt that Helter Skelter was code for an oncoming race war, and Piggies was indictment of the bourgeoisie. Inspecting the lyrics, we see little evidence to support these fantasies, which leads us to suspect that the whole family phenomenon was a FBI agency ruse. Gory sensationalism intended to discredit the burgeoning peace movement. The idea that the Beatles may have wanted to convey serious, even subversive messages through a pop medium is quite possible, though. In the wake of Leonard Bernstein and the critical elite trumpeting their Sgt. Pepper's album, the Beatles were certainly aware of their influence on culture. Like no one before or since, they simultaneously bewitched the intelligentsia and the teeny bops. Paul McCartney, like a little string coming out of my mushroom. Paul McCartney spoke candidly of their cultural position, likening his group to revolutionary composers such as Igor Stravinsky. They made daring announcements about their use of illegal psychedelics and their aversion to the Vietnam War. So the Beatles had come up fast in this period, initially indulging in the carnality of success, and then, disillusioned, going off to a spiritual retreat to India. Returning from India, the group started their work on what would be called the White Album. The song Back in the USSR seems to address this disenchantment with their perceived hollowness of materialist society. Outwardly, the tune is clever. A spoof on the Beach Boys' trademarked pop post-WAP vocals and patriotic lyrics. The song may qualify, along with Happiness is a Warm Gun, as one of the first postmodern rock and roll songs, with its self-conscious deconstruction of the surf genre, using seemingly ironic lyrics. Paul McCartney was actually buddies with Beach Boys maestro Brian Wilson. Both men were left-handed bass-playing Geminis. So the spoof could be a tribute, or perhaps something entirely different. Perhaps politics, maybe even prophecy. The lyrics seem especially poignant now, with the wretched dissolution of Russia after the fall of communism and the wholesale surrender of that country to exploitation by foreign investors. Back in the USSR, the song says, "You don't know how lucky you are." This chorus seems prophetic, but maybe Paul McCartney was merely canny, having spent time in the occupied zone, American, British, West Germany, and knowing the allure that Western goods had to the poorer Easterners. The song begins, strangely enough, in Cuban right-wing expatriate stronghold Miami Beach, which, as a kid that was interesting to me. Like, what starts in Miami Beach? It's back in the USSR. And I thought that was just because it was like a beach thing. Like, oh, he's going from the beach to the cold. But I never thought about the Cuban connection. So, flew in from Miami Beach, BOAC, didn't get to bed last night. On the way, the paper bag was on my knee. Man, I had a dreadful flight. The reactionary counter-revolutionaries have so sickened the song's protagonist, he's actually been vomiting. "I'm back in the USSR," he exclaims, overjoyed that he's been delivered from the Bulgarian citadel to his beloved Soviet Socialist Republic. "Leave it to tomorrow to unpack my case." The baubles he's collected at the American Mall to impress his proletarian mate have lost their charm as they're overwhelmed by the beauty of the motherland and the socialist system. "Honey, disconnect the phone." His attitude betrays an isolationism which goes against Lenin's internationalist doctrine, but here is merely intended to belie any need to communicate with the West. "Ukraine girls really knock me out. Leave the West behind. Moscow girls make me sing and shout. George is always on my mind." This lyric belies Wilson's declaration about the supremacy of California girls, which he had carefully outlined in an eponymously titled Beach Boys song. Although the USSR was an ethnically diverse country, the protagonist sees beauty in all its inhabitants. Let me hear your balalakas. Balalakas. Let me hear your balalakas ring out. Come and keep your comrade warm. I really was not able to pronounce that. Hey, thank you for the reading. Yeah, thank you. I'll try to keep the tempo a little more consistent. So come and keep your comrade warm. In this nationalist sentiment, which refutes the rock guitar craze and Western instrumentation that were sweeping away all cultural nuances in the rest of Europe. After his international touring, McCartney would have well understood rock and roll's cultural impact in spreading capitalist ideology. So here we see the Stones and the Beatles once again treading the same territory, but in markedly different ways. So this is where I feel like this essay kind of gets interesting. The Stones and the Beatles once again are treading the same territory, but in markedly different ways. While Sympathy for the Devil searches through history for examples of dialectical upheaval, the Beatles are actually looking backward from the future onto their own time, warning the Soviets of the folly that will befall them if they are seduced by capitalism. "You don't know how lucky you are, boy," they insist as they survey the wreckage of modern Russia. And this was again written in like the late 90s, mid 2000s. Such an appraisal of this song leads one to examine the other tunes comprising the White Album, most notably Lenin's Revolution, which decries the extremism of particular incendiary groups. One line declares, "If you go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, you ain't gonna make it with anyone anyhow." And in lieu of their pro-Soviet posturing earlier on the record, we recognize that this reflects the Soviet-Sino split. Yes. Where was I? Yeah. So in lieu of the pro-Soviet posturing earlier on the record, we recognize that this reflects the Sino-Soviet split, which occurred around this time, when Mao was incensed by Khrushchev's denouncement of Stalin. This fissure prompted Nixon's cynical collusion with the Chinese, and the resulting isolation and eventual defeat of Russia. 1968 was also a landmark year for the Cultural Revolution in China, which precipitated horrible barbarity against intellectuals in the name of agrarianism. The Cultural Revolution, of course, was Mao's war against a rebellious Communist Party, which he replaced with a personality cult based around himself. The intellectuals he vilified and destroyed were Soviet-style party apparatchiks. In Western pop, 68 was similarly the year that cerebral psychedelic music was refuted in the name of a roots country blues revival, typified by Creedence, Grateful Dead, Burrito Brothers. This would spell the end of the Beatles, who had essentially invented intellectual psychedelia, while it furthered the career of the Stones, who represented the mass proliferation of a rural aesthetic. The Beatles versus Stones dialectic, then, was actually Lennon and McCartney's industrial Sovietology versus Mick and Keith's agrarian Maoism, a direct reflection of the intra-commie ideological conflict of the time. The inability of the revolutionary superpowers to find common ground spelled communism's inevitable dissolution in the face of imperialism, with the absorption of Russia as a new third world and China's embrace of exploitative capitalist imperialist tactics. Wow. I mean, and he was writing this back in the early 2000s. But it's even more so now. Their respective ideological surrenders meant the abandonment of smaller nations. Right? Yeah, I love this guy. His music's cool too. Ian Svenonius. So their respective ideological surrenders meant the abandonment of smaller nations who relied on their help against neo-colonial instigation by the capitalist investors. If you think of underground music as occupying the space of a Cuba or Venezuela and Sony representing the USA, the situation seems to still echo the larger conflict. If only the Fabs and the world's greatest rock and roll band could have listened to their own advice and come together, perhaps it really would have been all right. So yeah, that's another essay from the Psychic Soviet. Great little book. I have no connection with Ian Svenonius. I'm just like a fan. I like his stuff. I've got this book here. And like part of the stream is going to be that we read some like theory or some critique or just something interesting. We get some kind of like inspiration. We get some kind of like perspective that we didn't have. And then we maybe try to work that into making some music. Like I'll show you my other screen here. I've got Ableton open. I could just start making tunes right now. If I was so inspired by this Beatles Stones conflict, maybe I could now go in and start making my own song. But this for me is kind of toward the end of the stream. So I'm just going to wrap up this little segment real quick by saying, yeah, please return. We're doing this every day. Every weeknight, we're going to be doing theory readings, and we're going to be doing like beat making and stuff like that. And every weekend, we're going to be doing the underground radio broadcast. And that's going to be up to you. You guys just send your music in, send your friend's band in, get their permission to do it. Fill out the Google Doc, links in the description. That's the kind of stuff that's going to help the community grow, and other artists are going to find each other, collaborate. Listeners are going to find other artists. We're going to do shows in real life, and everybody's going to get together, and the music scene is going to grow, and the underground scene is going to get stronger because there are resources like this. So please like the YouTube video, subscribe to the channel, follow, click the bell, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much. Beatles versus Stones, right? Sino-Soviet split. A lot to think about there. Thank you much. Tune in next time.